Welcome to the very first episode of the Fantasy Playcallers. I'm one of your hosts here. I am Ethan Stormans, and I'm awesome. I'll pass it along to our next host here.
I'm Dakota, and I am just as awesome as Ethan. Maybe just a little less.
And I'm Eli Stormant, and I am probably more awesome than both of them combined.
Fair enough. So we have a great episode for everybody today where we just want to go through and talk a little bit about who we are, what our fantasy football philosophies are, and just have a discussion in general. This will be kind of a how-to guide as far as how do you approach a fantasy football season, how are you approaching your projections, how are you approaching your draft, and all that good stuff. So that way you guys get a good idea of what our thought process is and see a little bit about us and know how we're going to kind of take things on and approach things.
I gotta throw on a disclaimer on this one. We are self-proclaimed experts, so.
I went to the fantasy university, as in it was a fantasy in my head, and now I'm an expert.
I've been stumbling through this for the last 3 years, and just try as hard as you can, but sometimes it doesn't go so well. All right, gentlemen.
Would you resend me that?
Yeah,
thing? So
absolutely.
I don't think I got it for whatever reason. Cool. But let's start with our first segment here, which is going to be fantasy football forecasts. So the idea here is, how do you forecast players? How do you take a look and think, okay, this guy's going to have 1,000 receiving yards and this guy's going to have 200? What's kind of the ideas and the methodologies? And we're not going to talk anything specific today. Like I mentioned, it's going to be very general terms. So that way this is usable during any given year at any point in time is really the idea here. So
you want to kick it off, or I'll go. Yeah,
go ahead.
So at least for mine, and again, big disclaimer on here. My forecast for my rankings and projections are, I've really been looking at a lot of age recently, like how old players are. I got really
huge factor.
Yeah, huge, massive. I really got into. I read something about how running backs over 25 haven't had a top 5 fantasy season since LaShawn McCoy when he was playing for the Eagles back in 2007. And I don't know why, but that just stuck with me, man. Like,
no, absolutely. The whole shelf life on running backs is a good point. And it means that for dynasty leagues, like I feel like you really have to catch them early, and for redraft leagues, it has made me take a second look at veterans, guys that are out there and have done well in the past, but maybe kind of hitting those upper 20s.
Yeah.
They get pretty scary, especially coming off an injury. Yeah. The tendon does not quite be the same. I think it's an important factor, and it's a great stat that you threw out about. I saw one very similar. It was like I believe it's 79% over the last 10 years of running backs that have made it at the top 12. Okay, between the ages of 23 and 26.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so it's like there's a very specific age range, I feel like, especially for running backs. Maybe not so true for wide receivers, especially not true for tight ends. I feel like tight ends are kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum.
The ageless dinosaurs that play.
Yeah. Well, there's been a lot of examples of running backs that are at the pinnacle, like, for example, Todd Gurley being at the age of 28, 29, and then the following year he should have been out of the league, and then the following year after that he was out of the league. So there is a cliff that they definitely hit pretty quickly that you have to be aware of.
Very
even
quickly.
If they're at the most pinnacle top, which Todd Gurley had scored the most touchdowns like in a 2-year span, I think almost ever in fantasy football, probably besides LaDainian Tomlinson. So
I think he's still on the top. I think he's still on the top 5 list of most touchdowns scored by a running back, and the guy hasn't played in 2 years.
Yeah, year and a half.
Hasn't been a starter in 2 years.
Yep.
Yeah, it's crazy. And it's hard because us as fantasy players, this guy led us to championships and has brought us in to be competitive during the playoffs, and then to have to let all that productivity go. Yeah. I feel like the fantasy community is still kind of catching up to some of that. So I think that, especially with running backs, is a big thing. And in Dynasty, I actually do the opposite. Like for the positions of quarterback and tight end, as I was kind of hinting at, is that I don't really care to get rookie tight ends. I don't really care to get rookie quarterbacks. I'd rather trade away my draft pick and get a tight end or a quarterback that is viable in in the league currently than to try and go for those rookies and take those risks because quarterbacks are so rare to hit. Mm-hmm. And then you have tight ends just aren't even usually productive for the first 3 years, so it's definitely a big factor.
And even when they are productive, they're so like compared to the other players, they're just ranked so low, or they typically don't have as high production. It's really weird, man. You want your Travis Kelce's and dudes who are a little older, but.
Yeah, just like Mark Andrews, he was in a crowded tight end field initially when he came out, and then it took 3.5 to 4 years before he literally had his actual breakout. Mm-hmm. So it just
and now everybody wants him.
Yeah, now everybody wants him. So now he's a commodity. So it'd be good to invest in second year, maybe third year tight ends in dynasty, just so hopefully that they break out that following year. But rookie tight ends, there are exceptions, but.
I'd love to bring us to a little debate that I think is as old as time when it comes to fantasy football.
Okay.
And this is it's almost a nature versus nurture. Okay, and this is skill level versus system.
Ooh.
When it comes to these guys, we all know that being in a great system matters. That having great amounts of skill matters. But when it comes to your rankings and your projections, guys, I'd love to hear what you think about what is more important. Is there a position where one is really more important than the other, and so on and so forth?
I think for the most part, opportunity follows talent, so usually they do align, but there are the rare opportunities where they don't. And in the case that they don't, fantasy football is majority of an opportunity point system. So the more opportunities, the more touches you have to touch the ball, whether you're running back, wide receiver, or you're getting targets, the more chances you have to score points. The issue is if you have somebody that is completely lapse of talent and you actually, throughout the season, the coaches and the team starts to actually put one and one together and they realize that this guy does not deserve the amount of touches or it starts to decrease and get other people involved, that's always a worry. So there's a balance between those, but you always lean for opportunity first, especially when it comes to if you have somebody who gets a lot of opportunity, you start to see that slip. You can try to sell high and get rid of them and try to get more of the talent. Because I feel like talent really towards the end of the year starts to peak out because that's when coaches really start to realize and get trust in people that are maybe unproven but have a lot of talent.
It does, and I know we said we're not going to talk specifics, but like I will give you a prime example of what I think is a system versus skill. Joe Mixon.
Oh, you think it's system?
Personally, I think Joe Mixon's a system guy. He's getting all. I mean, you look at who was behind him for the last few years. It's pretty much him. He's the big name.
P. Ryan, is really the
the guy's he's the bell cow. He's getting the touches. He's always lined up in the backfield 75% of the time. But is his production high for a guy who gets that many touches? I don't think so.
See, and I completely agree with you guys. I like where your head's at. I will say this, though, that it does change for me based off of position a little bit again, because I think that there's only one running back on the field typically in any given situation. Whereas wide receivers, there's 2 or 3 on the field every play. So tight ends, once again, opportunity, quarterbacks, opportunity. But when it comes to wide receivers, I kind of have a special soft spot in my heart for talent because I think, like you mentioned, is that opportunity follows talent, right? So like at the wide receiver position, I feel like you have more ability to create those opportunities for yourself than possibly at running back or tight end or quarterback. What are your thoughts on that?
On system with wide receivers, I'd say definitely. I mean, like I think this year you're going to see a lot of guys who their system is changing, and we're really going to get to determine whether or not it's they're as good as you think they are. I know we just talked about not too long ago, Robert Woods. It's a pretty drastic system change. Do you put a lot of stock in a guy who has spent his entire career with one team, and then all of a sudden he's changing a team? He's got a whole new dynamic.
It went to a very pass-friendly, genius head coach, offensive play caller system to a defensive-minded, run the football first, pound it down their throat team.
Yep.
Completely understand concerns there.
A quarterback who's not necessarily as proven. I think the quarterback is a huge place in the system.
Yeah, I'd much rather have Stafford than Tannehill for sure.
I don't think I would disagree with you.
No doubt. And I do think that there are players that are roles and systems, even for wide receivers and stuff, that are interesting to me. Like, and I know we said we're going to talk too much specifics, so I won't go too into detail here. But like Andy Reid for me always has a stretch playmaker that takes the ball down the field.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's Deshaun Jackson, whether it is Tyreek Hill.
Yeah.
And really, personally, in drafts this year, I'm looking at it and going like, I'll take my chances on every wide receiver on his roster in the hopes that I find that guy.
Mm-hmm.
And because whoever does get that role, it's such a good system and such a good role in that system. It's been so successful historically. Mm-hmm. So I do look for things like that even in the wide receiver realm. But I think it's worth noting. Obviously, you know, if you're on a great team with a great quarterback, it certainly matters.
I gotta ask you though. Like, you know, you talk about Andy Reid. I know we keep saying no specifics, but like, what about Bill Belichick, man? What about the Patriots? Like, that's a good system. And they normally have pretty good talent at quarterback, but there's a lot of hungry mouths to feed, man. There's a lot of hungry mouths.
The thing about New England's system is that they can be so cruel to fantasy players in that they don't care about us at all, and they'll have 7 wide receivers catch passes and 5 running backs touch the ball, and they don't care.
No.
Bill Belichick spits in the face of fantasy football players. He don't give a
He enjoys it. He really does.
He really does.
Quite the sadist in that way.
Yes.
I mean, you know, at the end of realistically, you know, this guy has fantasy football has no bearing on how he makes his team choices or what he does, but it's kind of funny to think about.
Nobody has any bearing on Bill's choices besides Bill.
No.
You can't even tell him to make an offensive coordinator. He's like, no one's the offensive coordinator.
Exactly.
I don't care. I'm Bill Belichick. I do what I want.
Yes.
Get out of here.
Exactly.
One thing I'd like to touch on too, so I just was going through doing some of the projections. I know you guys were as well. One thing I noticed is that there are teams, and when it comes to their target distribution by their quarterback, that some of them aren't highly concentrated, right? And some of them are really spread out. In other words, they might have 3 wide receivers that are getting 250 targets combined, which would be a really concentrated example, or there might be 5 wide receivers that it takes to get to 220 combined targets in a more diluted sample. And I guess the question I have here is that are you willing to double down and go after maybe the second and third wide receiver in those offenses if you feel like the target distribution is more top heavy? So the T. Higgins of the world, the Jalen Waddle, the Devonta Smith, if we're talking this year, those guys, how do you feel about them? Is it something that you feel like people undervalue? Is it something that people overvalue? How do you kind of forecast them out and project how they're going to do?
I think it's undervalued. I think it's definitely something that people should pay more attention to, because if you look at Mike Williams, man, like nobody expected Mike Williams last year to have the year that he had, and the distribution was pretty. Keenan Allen was obviously getting more targets from Phillip Rivers and Justin Herbert, but
Mike Williams is getting a lot more downfield targets.
All of a sudden, you have this guy who he's getting a lot of targets and kind of unexpected. It was very weird. I think if you look at the distribution a little bit more, I think you have a better idea about maybe.
Yeah, and they're very top heavy. It's a great example because they like, who's the third wide receiver? He's getting maybe 40 to 50 targets at most in a team that's throwing the ball 620 times a year.
Yeah.
I mean, not a lot as far as the thirds, which means that those top guys, they're just gonna get just buckets and buckets of chances at the ball, which is, as we mentioned, is huge.
Fantasy football is a very psychological game, so when you have people drafting number 1 wide receiver initially, the tendency is you want to reach for another wide receiver 1. You don't want to take a wide receiver 2. So it's natural where those type of players actually fall in the draft past their actual value of whether they're actually going to be statted out, because again, you want somebody's one. You want to be able to see that my guy's going to be targeted all the time, where in these offenses there is going to be a lot of value had there because of the amount of that they're top heavy and like the quarterbacks they have, for example, like Joe Burrow. So I think there is a lot more value to be had there, and they could be very solid wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1 for some cases. So
I gotta ask this with projections, like do you take coaching staff, like new coaches, things like that? Is that a pretty heavy input?
I'm big into it. I'm not gonna lie. I absolutely love it. One of the reasons why I was such a big Breece Hall and will be a big Breece Hall pound the table for Breece Hall this year.
Spoilers.
Sorry, spoilers. My bad. It's because he's running that Shanahan coaching.
Yeah.
He's from that Shanahan coaching tree. They're going to run a lot of outside zone concepts.
Yep.
They're going to stretch the defense and then bring wide receivers back around.
Yep.
And I think that those types of systems have always just been very successful with their running backs. They have a history and a great track record of being successful. The Jets have had a history and track record of being successful running the ball. And then when you add the talent into a situation like that, right, I think that it's a recipe for greatness. I really do.
You can't have a kind of what you're saying is, like the Browns a couple years ago, you can't have a real good team with a bunch of first-round draft picks and good players and then have a crappy coaching staff.
Exactly.
You just end up with a under team who's going under even. And
whereas Bill Belichick, you don't know who's going to start on his team. It could be a 5th rounder that the Raiders drafted 10 years ago, or it could be his pick.
The bag boy from the
you have no idea who's playing on his team or where they're coming from.
The car hop threw his keys perfectly. He's like, "I'm signing up. You're backup QB. Let's go."
You're the next Tom Brady, brother.
And no matter what, he seems to find a way to be competitive every year. I think it's a really good point that I think that coaches can make a huge difference, and one that they control the opportunities that players get, and at least to some extent, and two in that.
And I think it's obviously easier when they have a track record or they had some years before that either as an offensive coordinator or as a head coach, you can look at kind of how the teams went. Where if it's a brand new head coach that was just associated with the team, maybe they're a defensive coordinator and they really haven't had a chance to show what they want to do on offense. We can speculate, but sometimes that can get you in a lot of trouble with if you just automatically assume what direction they're going to actually go.
Yeah, don't assume the Jets are going to be good. It's usually a bad plan, I think is what he's getting at here.
Yeah. We want to say it all right. Really limit our viewing section from the...
It's always gambling, that's all it is.
It's only 12 million people city in New York, but that's fine.
Jets fans know that the Jets have been bad for a long time. And, I'm actually a believer in the Jets this year. Like, for the first time in forever. I actually am. But we'll see how that turns out.
Don't give them hope.
All right, let's talk about draft day itself in our new segment here on the clock. So it is draft day. What are you doing? You waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning, drinking 15 eggs like Gaston from Beauty and the Beast, and doing your reps. Dakota's definitely doing some reps over here. Maybe not so much.
No.
What's your game plan on draft day? How do you approach it? What's the headspace you want to be in? What are you thinking?
First off, super excited. Like it's basically the one day a year. You just get pumped.
It's like Christmas.
It's Christmas. Yep.
For those who are listening who don't know Eli has a brood of people that live at his house. So this is draft day is a huge thing for him.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Eli.
It's a day for me away from the family, doing something that I love. It just sounds amazing.
It's like his Christmas, 4th of July.
I do think though, for the majority of the time, you should have everything prepared to go into draft day, where your cheat sheets, the people you circled, you've done mock drafts beforehand, so that way, if you're scrambling and doing a lot of things on draft day, you are going to be in some serious trouble, actually.
So I got a question for you then. You mentioned mock drafts, man. How many mock drafts, and this, I know the number's going to be astronomical, how many mock drafts do you do getting ready for the draft day?
I don't like to count. It just makes me feel bad about myself. So, no, it's a really good thing to do. You can practice draft strategies. You can look at kind of how things fall. I know sometimes, depending on the platform, you can kind of get thrown off by people that are idiots on there. But for the most part, you can get some great ideas and kind of know what you want the structure of your team to be by doing some mock drafts and seeing how things fall.
You get used to what your pick is going to be.
Yeah.
And I will say this though, in my experience, I almost have to draft more aggressively in the mock drafts, and then maybe it's just the leagues I'm in, and then I go in and I'm getting players that I wasn't expecting to get. It almost throws me off.
Yeah.
It kind of gets in my head a little bit.
It happens a lot in modern, especially with running backs for whatever reason. Like when people are just messing around, I feel like they like to just go I'm going to draft 5 wide receivers or whatever else. But when it's actually at least my group of friends that we all tend to play fantasy football with, really, I mean, what ends up happening is that the running backs just go much more aggressively sometimes than they do in those mock drafts, which is tough to account for. So I do try and, when I mock, kind of take that into account and go, okay, there might be some wide receivers left that are already gone, but there also is going to be less running backs available probably in my real draft than there will be here because of the nature of the beast of it's all fun and games. Maybe we draft some wide receivers, but when it's all business time and my reputation's on the line, I might go more running back.
You know the whole Brett Coleman thing. Like I know you've watched the video. I know you've seen it. Like he always talks about how.
Real quick, Brett Coleman's a great YouTuber.
Oh yeah,
please do check him out. He's awesome.
Highly recommend if you're trying to get into it. Other than listening to us, definitely listen to Brett Coleman.
Yes.
He's great.
Wise in the ways of football for sure.
I gotta say with him, like I find his draft advice of don't fall with the run when there's a huge run on running backs. Like guys
draft the wide receiver.
Yeah, let's say you're the 9th pick, and this year, the 9th pick is where the wide receivers start coming. 8 running backs are off the table, and now you're reaching into what might be the second round for somebody like Alvin Kamara, DeAndre Swift, and
versus Cooper Kupp,
exactly.
that you can grab at the top or whatever.
And he said, "I'm a big fan of the whole like don't go for the run because you're going to get better value with what is available. Go for the best player value available for the pick."
Yeah, I think that's good advice, especially. Especially kind of this year, I feel like that there's some running backs at the top end.
Yeah.
8 of them.
Not to get too specific, but that are, as we mentioned, kind of on the upper side of the age and everything else. And there's some good wide receivers that'll be there.
So as far as draft strategies or like what I would recommend, don't be the guy that just prints off the top 200 and draft off that sheet. Do your own research. Try to figure out who you like.
Look up
personally,
our top 200 and then use
absolutely.
our top 200.
Link below.
And
we will
win for sure, guaranteed.
Asterisk.
Big asterisk, but guaranteed.
Guaranteed.
You will get nothing back.
Don't read the fine print.
Yes.
I like that though. I like not build your own thing.
Yep.
Know what you're doing.
Yep. I would say that what to your point as far as not reaching is what to do what's called tier drafting. Basically have different players in different tiers, and that way if there is a run on running backs, which you see typically in the first round, if it gets past a tier where you think, well, this next group is going to be around and I could draft this same guy in the same tier 2 in the 3rd round, or I could get a tier 1 wide receiver right now. It allows you to zig when they zag, and you'd be able to get more value that way, and then you can still get a running back that's fairly equivalent in talent and value.
I love that about tiers because they give me personally the mental flexibility to think in a probability spectrum. Because so often when I'm drafting, I'm like, oh no, like I love this guy. I bang on the table for this guy. That's my guy, and I'm in love. I do. I get stuck on people. But the truth of the matter is that wherever your guy is and whoever you absolutely love and would go to bat for, there are other guys that are going to put up very similar numbers
100%.
That year with very few exceptions. And those exceptions usually are gone in the first 5 picks of the draft. So with that being said, you should be thinking in tiers. You should be thinking in, yes, maybe I didn't get the 1,000-yard rusher, but there's another 1,000-yard rusher coming up here in a little bit. And if I'm patient and I take the wide receiver now, I can turn around.
Right.
And I don't have to reach for this guy that I like, even though I like him a little more, maybe.
Yeah.
You're willing to, because you still want to go after your guys. I clearly read that, but you're willing to risk it more to see if he comes back to you because there's other people in the same tier as your guy that you might want.
Exactly.
And I gotta say, I've seen more people win their leagues from rolling deep with 3 wide receiver ones and maybe some RB2, maybe even RB3, like digging through the dirt in order to find those running backs. And when they're putting up, each wide receiver's putting up at least 20 points a game. It doesn't matter what they're running. I mean, it does, but it doesn't matter what their running backs are.
So what I'm hearing a lot of, maybe kind of inadvertently here, is that when you go into draft day, you got to have some level of flexibility. There has to be the ability. If they go all wide receivers, everybody goes wide receivers. Maybe you want to take that running back.
Yeah.
If you get knocked down to the next tier, don't get frustrated and then take a player out of angst or whatever else. Be patient. Pick a player from a different position and let that tier come back around to you because someone from that tier will be there. On the next pick and have some patience with it.
And I'm going to turn a phrase for this, and I didn't make up this phrase. This is something that I learned is the 70% solution. Like, you go into the draft with an idea, 70% of what you think is going to happen, and because nothing survives first contact.
No.
The second you roll into that draft, all of a sudden somebody might take Tom Brady #1 overall, because there's always that guy.
Or a kicker in the second round.
Or a kicker.
It's happened.
Yeah.
I've been in leagues that it's happened.
And then just boom, your plan is shot. But like you're saying, flexibility is huge. You can't roll into a draft and be inflexible, because then you'll throw yourself into the dirt the minute that you get into the room.
Yep, for sure.
I kind of going on that. Like, I don't know if we're ready to talk handcuffs and safe words, right?
Let's talk a little bit. We were going to do risk and roster next.
Okay, my bad.
You go. So let's get into our next segment here, risk and rosters. Yeah. Right. So let's talk a little bit about roster construction. We kind of were already leaning into it anyway. So let's start there. When it comes to constructing your roster, we talked about you need to have the flexibility to be able to go 0 running back or take that running back first or whatever else. But let me ask you guys this: do you target specific teams? Like, let's say, for instance, there's a team in the NFL that you think that their players might be underrated. Are you willing to double down and go, okay, I'll double down and take 2 of them, or do you try and stay away from that?
Well, I mean,
what do you think?
You want to tackle that?
Yeah. So I don't think you have to stay away from it. Although I don't think you pursue it either. I think if you actually have more than one person, more than one player from a team, it does limit your upside a little bit, especially if you're thinking about a wide receiver or tight end. Obviously, unfortunately for you, if you have multiple players on the team, the quarterback can't throw 2 passes in one play. It's against the rules. I looked it up, and it's because of that you can only score, like, if only one of your players can actually score a touchdown. So I think the better way to approach it, if you do want 2 players for one team, is doing the QB wide receiver stack and looking at doing something like that. And even then, I wouldn't pursue it or go after it or reach for it, because otherwise that kind of pigeonholes you to having to follow a certain strategy in the draft. But if it's there and if it's a value, then I think it can make your weeks more explosive, because obviously if one scores a touchdown, the other one scores a touchdown in the same play.
I think kind of what you're poking at is, don't be afraid to take that big risk of, if I have Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase on the same in my roster, obviously both of them are gonna blow up. Like unless Jamar Chase has a drastic, catastrophic injury, knock on wood. But I personally,
not Jamar.
Yeah. Yes. I personally, when I look at risks, man, it really depends on who it is. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of conjecture that's rolling around.
Depends on the situation.
Yeah.
But do you view it as a positive or a negative? So like you're drafting this year. You've got Jamar Chase in the first round. All the players that you like are kind of gone. You got T. Higgins sitting there. It's either T. Higgins or you got to kind of drop down another tier and take the guy in a tier below. Do you go tier below or do you take T. Higgins?
I'm not afraid to take T. Higgins. I mean, something that sometimes people plan for with bye weeks, like you're going to take a hit during the bye week if you have 2 players on the same team. So like, T. Higgins and Jamar Chase both had great years last year. Is it really that big of a detriment to have?
Yeah, the bye week's going to hurt, but at the same time, you end up with players with the same bye week all the time. It's really not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
Here's what I say. Actually, I kind of have a different take on this, and tell me what you guys think if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I actually actively target getting players on the same team.
Terrible idea.
But hear me out. Here's why.
I already don't like it.
Here's why. Okay. I do it only late in drafts. So I tend to do this with my picks between like 9 and 14, somewhere in there. And what I look for is a great head coach or a great quarterback or some X factor that I think maybe people are not as tuned into, and maybe a roster's a bit undervalued overall. And then I'll go through and I will really target and go, okay, like I'm going to hammer home. In the past for me, it has been the Patriots have actually been a good example. Back when they had Tom Brady, no one knew who their wide receivers were going to be once Randy Moss left. And it's like, okay, what's going to happen?
You're dating yourself.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I'm old, guys. It's the big 3-0 this year, so I'm old. But in all seriousness, so what I would do is I go through and for the last 4 picks, I just take every one of those wide receivers, and I'm like, well, I don't know who is going to pan out, but I do feel like one of these guys is going to be very successful, and I can drop the other 3 for waiver wire pickups later. Do you guys ever think to do something like that? Or is that
to me, that seems a very extreme example to draft 3 wide receivers on the same team to go that route. I would, like I said before, I think it. If you know that's a good coach, a good quarterback, it's okay to take another wide receiver in the later rounds, and see if you can do your shot to see if he is going to be the next best option. The only other concern that I have with that too is though, what if that QB gets hurt? Then you're literally down the backup QBs. There's a huge.
But then you've
drop
only
off.
lost your picks 9 through 14,
Now,
which are usually buying lotto tickets at that point in the draft anyway, aren't you? A little bit.
But wouldn't you, if you had more opportunities for other lotto tickets other than one bats, because not all, no matter what, those are not going to hit. No, so you have more chances to be able to hit if you have other players on other teams.
Hear me out. In my mock draft this year, okay, I will sometimes take Juju in the 7th, and then I will turn around and I will grab Marquez Valdez-Scantling in the 12th and Mecole Hardman in the 13th. And here's what I'll say. I believe with my whole heart that Pat Mahomes is going to be a top 5 quarterback in the NFL this year. And I have no idea which, if any of those wide receivers are going to be the guy.
Yeah.
But I feel like at those numbers and at those values, if I take all 3, one of them is going to end up being the guy.
And I think personally that's a very specific example. I think it works with Juju being in the 7th round. I don't necessarily know he's a newer player. I don't necessarily know if he's going to roll onto the field and he's going to click with Pat Mahomes. You never know.
You're taking a lotto ticket. You're taking a shot, right?
MVS might go in and he might click way better with Pat Mahomes.
He could be the guy.
I'm a big fan of if they're mid round or mid tier, maybe taking another guy in the later rounds. I'm not going to take him back to back. I'm not going to take him even a few rounds later. I'm going to take him towards the end, and I'm going to try to get those other mouths that are on the team. Yeah. But
and here's the other thing you can do this year. And you say it's a specific example, but this year you can do the same thing with the Green Bay Packers. You could go take Alan Lazard in the 8th. You could take Christian Watson in the 9th, and then get Sammy Watkins in the 13th, and you would have the starting wide receivers
I don't know if
for the Green Bay Packers and an Aaron Rodgers team with he's a top 5 quarterback,
I don't know
right?
if I would take all 3.
But in my perspective, and you can go whatever perspective you want, but you're literally guaranteeing 2 of your picks are not going to be valuable. Where if you actually diversify and pick, I'm going to do Allen. I'm going to put my flag at Alan Lazard, and that's what I'm going to go with on that. And then I could choose. Maybe I'll choose the Kansas City as an example. I'll do MVS. And then if one of those hits, and you still have another third one you can put out there, and you have a chance where maybe 2 of the 3 hit. Where in your scenario, you are guaranteeing that...
Not guaranteed. They could all have decent seasons.
They're not
all going to be 1,000-yard receivers.
Correct.
No way.
And
There's
the absolute worst-case scenario, which I know you don't think is possible, is it's all spread out, and then you get 3 mediocre wide receivers on your team that you spent draft picks on that does nothing for you in the draft.
I gotta bring this up because you guys are speaking from experience, right? And you're talking about holding on to them, and you guys know from having played. You guys have played fantasy football way longer than I have. And for me, when I started playing, it was really hard to determine when to drop somebody.
Yeah.
And so now you're talking about a situation where maybe 2 of them hit, and you have all 3. At what point do you pull the trigger and say, hey, these 1 or 2 aren't going to pan out. I need to drop them and maybe diversify my bench. That's a pretty hard thing to do for guys who are coming brand new into this game. It's hard to know when to keep those guys and when to set them free.
And you bring up actually a really good point in fantasy philosophy that I think is worth touching on, and is when you go to build your roster, right? How do you view these late round picks? And I think it's become clear from what we talked about is I view them like lottery tickets.
It's a crapshoot every time.
Like my view on them is I'm going to take as many chances at what I think will be a big player. And just hear me out. Whereas I think that Eli might view them as like these are chances to get legitimate contributors in my flex spot, and for my bye weeks, for other things, as well as lotto tickets. Is that fair to say?
I think that's fair.
No, it's fair to say, but what I was saying before is I want if I had if I had choices of one lotto or 3 different lottos, I'm choosing 3 different lottos. I have more opportunities. I can win in all 3 in a hypothetical scenario where in your case you can only win 1 lotto.
Probably, yeah.
So the
less likely that I win more,
extremely more probable that you probably only win 1 lotto. So I rather take, again, it's a long shot, but I rather have more chances at hitting in multiple hits rather than just 1 hit.
And I think I'm so ready to cut people that I'm the big roster turnover guy. I'm looking for the bigger, better deal. I want to trade. I want to cut people off my team and find somebody in free agency. So I think my philosophy really is take them. After the first 4 to 5 weeks, I should know who's hit and who needs to be gone.
Right.
And then I sell or
the other thing in that
strat
else. Is you're also putting a lot of your lotto tickets all in one position.
Yeah.
Where you're sacrificing maybe your other positions. Like for example, if you were gonna take like a safe QB and later in the rounds, like I don't know, Matthew Stafford or something, and then you wanted to take like a gamble QB. So like example, when Patrick Mahomes first came onto the scene, like nobody was drafting him when he was the second year. Like you could draft somebody safe, and then or for example Lamar Jackson when he broke out, nobody knew what he was gonna do. But if you take somebody safe, you take maybe that lotto ticket at QB and he actually hits, then you have a lotto ticket and you can make your roster change and maybe get rid of that quarterback.
No.
So it's more of like what do you want to put your lottos in, and is it worth it to give up that much of your lottos in one position?
That's a great point. And I will say when I do that, I always make sure to get an early tight end and an early QB for that reason.
Because if you miss on those, then you're stuck.
Yes.
I'm gonna go against the grain with both of you, and I'm gonna say that for me, I do not actively target multiple wide receivers that are unknowns on the same team. Like if I get Allen Lazard, I'm not necessarily gonna go for any other receivers who are on the Green Bay Packers. I prefer to hedge my bets on different teams, and I really like to go for who not necessarily saying like, well, I got to figure out who the Green Bay Packers are gonna make their number 1 receiver this year. I diversify, and so I might say like,
you want Lazard, and then let's get Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and then let's go pick up Kenny Pickett late or somebody that has a chance to, in a very good system, could be a very good quarterback. It could surprise everybody.
Now, with that being said, I'm not gonna go into that with no research. I'm not just gonna fly blind and say like, well, I like Allen Lazard's name, so I'm gonna pick Allen Lazard.
Absolutely.
Like, some people might, I don't know, but
it's a pretty cool name.
It is.
It's great.
It sounds like
I'll move him up a couple.
But
just off the name alone.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not going to necessarily. I feel like I almost do more research in the later round players than I would with the earlier round players, and that's
same
because I want to have different. I want to diversify my portfolio. I want to have different bets in different places.
And it's fun to find a sleeper. There's something about being able to look at, like, I got this guy in the 10th, and look at how great he is now. And I do think that's a part of the thrill for me in doing that. It's like, I want to be able to look at my friends and be like, ha, you had no idea that he was going to be great, but I knew because I drafted 3 people on the same team, and I knew one of them had to be good.
Now, we just for those who are listening, we just did our first Dynasty League last year, and it was I think it was an absolute smashing success.
It's been great.
I think it's a great format. Never had this opportunity before to do it, and it was fun.
If you've never done Dynasty, cannot recommend it enough.
I would choose the right amount of people, or the right group.
Yes, we have a great group of people to do it with.
Too big, it's not as fun because your benches are going to be real deep. But for me, when I roll into Dynasty, and I'm going to go back to risks, I'm going to move kind of off the hedging your bets with a team, and I'm going to go back to risks if it's okay.
Yeah, please do.
When it comes down to like with rookies, man, I'm not necessarily listening to as much fear coming into the preseason or when they're working in their camps. I'm not really listening to the fear that everybody's talking about, because everybody wants to talk about how Jamar Chase was dropping passes last year and how he's not going to be a good fit, or Devontae Smith isn't necessarily linking up with Jalen Hurts as well. Everybody wants to talk about that, but when you look back at Jamar Chase, the drop passes wasn't a factor.
Didn't matter at all.
And so, like, you kind
of... Turns out, that OTA drop passes don't mean anything. Turns out.
Over-exaggerated.
Yes.
Yes.
And for me, like, I'm going into this and I'm looking at, and I'm listening to this, and I think what they're trying to do, or when people talk about it, is they're trying to disqualify players. They're trying to say, like, whatever, they're irrelevant. And
so let me ask you this: do you buy the hype going the other way? Like I just saw a bunch of articles come out today about how Jahan Dotson is going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. Him and Carson Wentz, they're hooking up. He's going to be amazing, and he's making one-handed grabs in practice, and he's awesome and amazing.
It's Carson Wentz and the Redskins, or I'm sorry, the Washington Commanders.
Yes,
it's them. Like I'm going to put a little less faith in that guy simply because of the fact that it is the Washington Commanders and he's working with
and my point is not so much the Jahan Dotson thing is how do you feel about the training camp hype and the training camp storm clouds that they put over players?
Bunch of smoke.
I'm with you. I think back to what I said. I think there's a lot of reporting or whatever you call it, whatever these people do, Adam Schefter or whatever these announcers. I think they try to.
There's not a lot going on, and they want to report on something, so it's grasping at anything's grasping at straws. So there will be people that hype that will never materialize into anything. You can look at even showing in the preseason or your pre-training camp hype, like Braylon Edwards last year on the Raiders.
You're right, great example.
I think he was compared to Randy Moss. I think at one point. So
wait. Are we sure Braylon Edwards isn't Randy Moss?
Well, we haven't verified yet, so there's still time to pan out. I go pick him up now if you can trade in fantasy.
I highly recommend not touching him this year.
But no, and he obviously didn't do basically anything all year, and there's more examples like Miradula that went off in preseason a few years back, and he was great.
I did buy some hype.
They sent a pound out. So there's always going to be hype, and especially when you're talking about OTAs and everything like that they have nothing else to do besides hype up their own players. So I think you got to get through the smoke. I think on the opposite side, though, if there's a lot of detractors, typically they want to hype their players, and they usually don't want to destroy their players. That your example for Jamar Chase was an outlier for the majority of the cases. If you're starting to hear that a player didn't meet weight requirements, is overweight, or is looking slow, or
or the Treylon Burks phenomenon that's happening right now where you can't make it through conditioning at practice, apparently.
Exactly. So it doesn't mean that you necessarily are off that player. It would just give you a little bit more hesitant and pause to maybe look into that player a little bit more and see what else comes out on that player, if anything changes in preseason or anything like that, because if things don't change, then that's going to be an issue.
So I got to bring this up. I tend to listen to more hype, or I guess smoke. Is that what the word that we're using?
Smoke.
The smoke. Yes. I listen to a little more of the smoke when it's a more established player. So if we're rookies, man, they're coming out of college. There's going to be some catches and some stuff that are not necessarily like they don't mesh.
Everyone's grading them based off of a very small sample size at that point. They don't have a lot of information.
But now when we're talking about like established players, now if I heard that, not that I didn't hear this, but if I'm hearing that Devontae Adams and Derek Carr are, not meshing when they're
bickering during practice,
they're bickering, they're fighting, they're like bitter exes. I might listen to that a little more because Devontae Adams is a more experienced player.
So how do you feel about the hype of them? Everyone's coming out that they're best friends and that they love each other and that Derek Carr is going to target Devontae Adams.
I think that's
Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp had breakfast every morning last year, and my God, I think it worked. So there's something in that.
No, I actually really do believe, because quarterbacks do have some control over targets, and you mentioned that opportunities are big, and if they're looking, if they have the guys that they like or whatever else, it matters. Yeah, it definitely does. To what extent?
I think the NFL likes to paint a a good buddy story and saying like, hey, it builds hype for the Raiders, which the Raiders have been trying to get traction, getting hype, breaking out of the reputation, moving into Las Vegas. They're trying to get more hype behind the Raiders, and so they're definitely going to sell a Devontae Adams, Derek Carr story.
And so, but sometimes it's very true. Look at the Jamar Chase. Let's go back to that again. That same Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase had a history together. And they are mind melded clearly. It's apparent on the field that these guys are on the same page all the time. Yep. And that does matter.
Oh, absolutely.
100%.
So there is it's interesting that on that front is like looking for those connections is
one more example for negative, and we didn't really talk about like not only on the play negative press, but when it comes to personal issues or legal issues or some of those things
we've
pop
had quite
up.
the offseason of legal issues, eh?
Yeah, but I just had a flashback to when I drafted Antonio Brown when he was a Raider, and you need to pay attention to the news and what's going on.
Try not to draft crazy people.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Even if they're really good at the football.
If you can, send them a test they can fill out or something because...
Nobody saw it. Some people saw it coming, but I don't think
the American Psychiatric Association has a test for that. I think we might need a couple.
No matter how good they are at football, if they can't get out of their own way, you are not going to go far.
Even with the smoke though on Antonio Brown, I don't think anybody was expecting the level of meltdown that he multiple times that he experienced last year.
So many meltdowns.
Nobody was expecting that.
Not even just one, just so many. And you know what? Real quick, just a random thought, but kudos to Mike Tomlin for having Le'Veon Bell, Ben Roethlisberger, and Antonio Brown in the same locker room for 9 years.
Yes.
Or Le'Veon Bell wasn't there that whole time, but AB was there for 9 years.
Deserves a lifetime achievement award just for doing that.
Absolutely. I mean, what a coach! I mean, to just be able to deal with it. I mean, how in the heck? Random, but let's talk a little bit about the risk on the personal issues and on the legal issues. As we mentioned, it's been an offseason just absolutely full, whether you want to talk Calvin Ridley or Alvin Kamara, or you want to talk Deshaun Watson. There are lots of these issues, and we don't have to get into specifics of any situation, but how do you deal with these types of risks? How do you put those into your projections and your strategy? What do you do?
So I'm gonna throw myself back a little bit. I remember a couple of years ago, Aaron Jones was dealing with a suspension for the first 2 games, and Aaron Jones fell, maybe the 12th, 13th round in our league, and I drafted him, and he, after his first 2 games, turned into an absolute monster. A couple years ago, Ezekiel Elliott had the first, 6 or 8 games? And 6?
Yeah, I think so.
Is it like 5 in a bye week or something?
Something like that, yeah.
And, you definitely, depending on who the player is, you definitely want to look at the legal issues and say, like, well, is he going to come back? Like, yeah, he's going to come back in a couple weeks, and he's going to be great.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a good point is that it's all about getting the right discount then. If he's going to be gone for half the season, there is something to be said about, like, there's total points scored throughout a season. That's a really easy way to look and judge players, but there's also points per game played. If a player like Ezekiel Elliott, especially during his prime, is on the field and playing for you, you know that he's going to put up big numbers.
Yeah.
Not even.
And at least at the time.
Not even.
And so it's like he might be worth taking a reasonably high round pick in that his points will be concentrated into those 8 weeks, and you know when they're going to be in whatever else.
Yeah, I think that's something you got to figure. 8 weeks or 6 weeks, it's a lot. It's an eternity in fantasy football. A lot of things can happen in, sometimes it depends on the situation. If it's a legal issue, obviously you know when they're coming back. If it's an injury, it's a little bit more difficult because they may look at Michael Thomas last year. They might think they're coming back and they never actually come back. So that's part of it too. But
when 8 weeks is over half your regular
and
season,
it depends on what you're paying for that too. Because if you go 1-7 or even 2-6, you are in a world of hurt, and you could take actually some value in replace of where you maybe are drafting them, where you can get help right away, rather than having to sit on a bench spot or not have that value added to your team while they're on suspension. So I think it's something that you can play. I think a couple games and stuff, when you get to 6 and 8 games, it gets pretty pretty hard
for a lot of your season.
to keep somebody on a bench spot that long.
I mean, for me, at least for me, if the value is there, and I'm gonna draft them, and I know that they're gonna like, let's say my starting 2 wide receiver and running backs are filled, and I have the opportunity to take Michael Thomas. I mean, Michael Thomas's last full season that he played, he had a record receptions, like single season receptions. If I see him and I have those 2 spots or those 4 spots filled, and he's available in the later rounds, I'm going to take him absolutely, because I might not need him right then, but I will say that it does add a little bit of value that he's rolling off the bench fresh in the middle of the season when a lot of the players are starting to get there's injuries. There's a lot more, there's a little bit more stuff going on, and players are tired. But if I can take him and all of a sudden he's playing fresh right when the playoffs start, or right as the playoff run is going to go, that's got good value for me. I think that's a good.
I think that's a great point, and that's what I've done that a few times in the past. I've just have been burned a few times too, where you think they're coming back, and they say they're coming back, and then they don't come back, and then you've wasted 6 to 8 weeks of the draft value and the roster spot for absolutely zero payoff. So it is very risky to do that. It can definitely pay off, especially if it hits. But if it doesn't, you are put behind the 8 ball by quite a bit.
But I think it takes a little bit of know-how and experience to be able to look at that guy and say, like, hey, I'm willing to take this risk. I'm in a good spot. But if I'm not feeling good about my starting 4, my 2 running backs and my 2 wide receivers, I'm probably not going to take I'm going to draft somebody who's a little more safe. I'm not going to necessarily take somebody who's.
Yeah, so don't reach for them. Make sure that you have your positions taken care of, at least for the beginning of the season, so that you're not completely out. And if somebody else wants to take the chance and take them before you get around to it, and once like we said at the beginning, right? It's like with your draft strategies, don't be so stuck on an idea that you reach for somebody. It's like, well, it'd be great to have Michael Thomas at his old prime, but that may or may not be the case this year, for example. There's been a lot of other situations that are very similar as far as, especially coming back from injuries. Injuries are so easy to re-aggravate, and these guys are pushing their bodies to the absolute max and to the limit all the time. So that sometimes bad things happen, unfortunately.
So I got to ask this then. You mentioned injuries. If we're looking at injuries, how much do you value? How much of a risk does a player who, like Christian McCaffrey or Derrick Henry, how much of a decrease in value do you see based on the risk? The fact that they're coming off of an injury, they're getting older. Derrick Henry is very quickly approaching that running back shelf life of 28, very young years. But I mean, he was on par. He was on pace to break the.
He's a Greek god.
Yeah.
Nothing.
He's an anomaly.
He's an anomaly.
I mean, with Christian McCaffrey, like nobody was expecting Christian McCaffrey to come from the previous years and then get re-injured. Yeah, it wasn't going to happen.
I will say this. I weirdly enough, even though Christian McCaffrey has been out the last 2 years, I have more leniency for injuries personally for receiving running backs than I do for big brawlers between the tackles, because I just feel like they tend to do better.
There's also a difference too, like in Christian McCaffrey's case. He has been injured, and he has played for the last 2 years, been in and out of the lineup, and that's been multiple times. I've dealt with one of those years, so I felt the pain. But when he's actually been on the field and actually healthy before he got actually re-injured or injured a different injury, his production was never dipped. It was always like peak. He was always RB at least 3 and above, and there's a few weeks where he was by far the RB1. So when you're looking at somebody that may have some injury past, but they have that type of ceiling, it makes you a little bit more forgiving for those type of people.
Just willing to take the risk.
You're willing to take the risk because when they are on the field, and in his case, you also need to look at, well, in all cases, like what type of injuries there are. If there are a lot of soft tissue issues, as they say, that may be an indication that it could be a recurring thing. If it's one of these odd, like he broke a bone or he rolled an ankle that really got swollen, like that's kind of an anomaly, or he tore his ACL, like that's not going to happen every year. Where that could be more of a indication where they might be a good value, or they might be labeled injury prone, but they're really not. It was kind of these weird on the field injuries at that.
For me, I'm going to go completely opposite of you.
Okay.
For me, man, if they have a reoccurring injury, like 2 players, spoilers right here, 2 players that I'm going to actively avoid this year are Saquon Barkley and Christian McCaffrey. And for me, the big reason why is because we've got 2 most recent seasons that these players have played a pretty insignificant amount. Christian McCaffrey played 3 games in 2020, and I think he played 7 in 2021. I don't know exactly how many Saquon Barkley played, but these guys are kind of like what you said. They're re-aggravating injuries, depending on what they are. But like injury-prone players, to me, like the more injury-prone they become and they're re-aggravating, to me, it doesn't matter if it's a soft tissue or broken bone or an ACL or something like that. The more they get injured, the farther I want to push them away from me.
Sure.
But again, that's just me.
And there's lots of debates that there is like, is injury prone a thing? And I think that players like Raheem Mostert comes to mind.
Yeah.
Percy Harvin, if you guys remember back in the day, I'm aging myself again. But these are players that were and are respectively consistently injured.
Yeah.
Consistently out.
Yeah.
And you can say there's no such thing as injury prone all you want, but at the end of the day, if I was willing to bet, Raheem Mostert's not playing 16 games this year.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Or 17.
And if he is playing 17, he's definitely going to have a reduced role.
But nobody's playing 17.
No.
Yeah, keep that in consideration.
But he'll be lucky to get to 10.
But for me,
right? Based off his history, or am I crazy on that? It's like
no.
I think there's not injury prone until you
I think
are.
you go based off his history and where he's at as far as progression and age too, and where he's at in his peak of his career. So Raheem Mostert's going to be 29 or going into 30, and he makes his hay too. You got to keep this in mind. Like, he's a speed guy, so the fact that he's getting older and he's had all these injuries and mileage a little bit, like that can. That's where you got to start to consider that takes a toll. So
he is 30. He's almost exactly my age, actually. So he's super old.
Yeah,
washed for sure.
Washed.
Sorry, you and me, we're done.
We'll see. His career's not over yet.
Yeah.
I still got 2 more good years, but I will say though, in my kind of like, I'm with you. If they have a reduced role, it gives me that warm fuzzy. I'm a little more willing to look past the injury prone.
Because if he's only getting 10 to 15 touches anyway, it does help.
If he's rolling, and 50% of touches, like that's low for Christian, or 50% of time on the field, that's pretty low for Christian McCaffrey.
He was at 1 year. He was at literally 97%, I think, for snap count.
So,
which is absolutely unheard of.
But other running backs, 50% that's gold. Right there. That's good. The guy's on 50% of the time.
If he's actually going to be anybody that's a cowbell runner, or technically like a cowbell runner, you would want it probably like 60-65%, and then the other would be 40. Anything below that.
Cow, not cowbell.
Well, maybe you want more cowbell.
So should we play Don't Fear the Reaper?
I gotta ask you this then. Like, if you're looking, I would see this as a risk. If you're looking at guys who are bell cow running backs.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe their production's not as high, their yards per carry is not as high. Are you willing to take a little bit more of a risk on that guy if somebody let's talk about the Bills. The Bills have Devin Singletary and they're good. Yeah, and they came out and said, hey, we still want Devin Singletary to be the dude. He's still going to get a lot of touches. He's going to get the majority of touches.
Okay, well, before we get into this specifically, I think you've got a great segue, and I have to say the name of the segment because I just love it so much. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about, guys, handcuffs in safe words, boys. So,
I have no safe words.
The safe word is ouch, ouch. Please stop.
Mine is just frantic yelling.
Yeah.
Two ouches. Anything less, you just keep
Mine's
going.
no, please continue.
So much for PG on that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But
no, it's a good point. It's a good question. There's been an evolution in the NFL also of backs by committee versus having that bell cow guy. And for instance, I think the Bills are very much splitting it into third down back versus first two. I think Singletary will be on the field for the first two. Cook is going to get a lot of the third down work, which in PPR is huge.
Big.
For sure.
Might get the red.
So just stop before we get into the handcuff. It kind of plays into it, but that's why a lot of people are willing to overlook Christian McCaffrey's injury prone, because it's so rare to have somebody that is going to get almost majority of the work and be super efficient and good at it. And whereas it's such a rarity nowadays that when you do find it, people are like clinging on to it, even if they've been burned or scorched for the last 2 years.
Yeah. How many people have his numbers on that many snaps and that many opportunities? I mean, the answer is virtually nobody. In the history of the NFL, virtually nobody.
I'll say this: when it comes to handcuffs, I personally am not a fan, and but it depends on the situation, and that has to be for me is, are the two guys going to be getting the lion's share of touches on the field?
So I think it's a really good point. I think we need to define what we would consider a handcuff too, as far as what if it's a 50-50 split, or if it's a 51-49 split. Like, where does the line come where it's actually?
What is Kareem Hunt? Is Kareem Hunt a handcuff, or is he a running back in his own right?
Correct.
AJ Dillon.
I'd say 35 and up percent. If they're getting 35 and up percent of the touches, and they're
not a handcuff anymore. They're their own man.
Okay.
I'd say it's his own man.
Okay.
But taking it back, like Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara, back when Alvin Kamara rolled into the field, he, you definitely, not a lot of people saw it coming. He was a pretty, at least for what he is, he was a pretty late pick for what he ended up producing. But
for sure,
a lot of people were targeting Mark Ingram because it was at least from my recollection, it was pretty even between the two. And
early on.
So it's almost worth it to have Mark Ingram and have Alvin Kamara. But back to, apparently we love talking about Christian McCaffrey.
How can you not? I mean,
Greek god of a human being.
Freak of nature for sure.
That's what is it? Selective breeding right there with the Olympiad mother and the pro NFL father. That is. But for me,
it is.
I don't know if I would target Chubba Hubbard at a high rate.
Let's say you take Christian McCaffrey in the first. You get Christian McCaffrey on your roster. It's now the 13th round. Mm-hmm. You've got a choice. You can take one of your lotto tickets, like we were mentioning earlier, on a late round wide receiver, or you can take Chubba Hubbard.
How
So here's how I'd look at it. Is I think what Dakota was saying, there are some exceptions where, with some handcuffs that are on the upper end, where if the main player goes down, that they're still getting the lion's share of work. Yeah. And those type of handcuffs are actually valuable probably to have. So, like, for example, Alexander Madison. If Dalvin Cook, he's already proven it. If he goes down, then that he's going to be able to put up a really good fantasy week because they've shown that they're willing to give him majority of the carries. Where in the case of Chuba Hubbard, we've seen him play.
Is it Chuba or Chubba?
It could be either one, and I think the name fits the play.
It's actually just Chubba Bubba. He likes to be called Chubba Bubba. I know him on a personal.
I think that's going to be his name.
That's
what Chubba Bubba.
Chubba Bubba.
So, and nothing against it. I think he had some decent fantasy value. I think he's probably in 20s to 30s. I don't have it in front of me, but he didn't get the lion's share of the work. They brought in other people to take up some of the work as well. So in those cases, you're spending a late round pick on those guys, where in reality you're probably going to drop them within the first 2 to 3 weeks. There's not a lot of value in doing that, where you could have a chance of getting somebody else that could turn into a valuable running back or whatever the case is. So in my opinion, there are a few exceptions that I would make. For example, if I took Dalvin Cook, I think I would draft Alexander Madison just for the fact that we know there's some proven record there. But for majority of the time, unless it's a really big standout, I typically avoid handcuffs.
Me too.
And the real handcuffs. Now, if you want to talk about what we talked about, splits or handcuffs with standalone value, I think is the best way to put it, then that's a different
The great part about splits is that you already know they're going to have standalone value if the other guy goes down, which is because they have standalone value when they're not down. So, of course, they're going to have even more standalone value You know, the Kareem Hunts, the Melvin Gordons of the world at this point in time. I think Michael Carter for this year falls into that category for me as well.
He was so good when he was healthy.
Yeah, he'll still get some work. There's no doubt about it.
I've also seen, some information, some other fantasy football people in the industry talk about, like, especially for handcuffs, you want to look for people that are running backs, especially that would be pass catching running backs, because typically those are the ones that are going to already have standalone value, because in half point or full point PPR they're going to be able to get their own points, and they have a role typically. And then if the running back does go down, they'll have an opportunity, or hopefully have an opportunity to take on more of a role. So I think looking for somebody what I look for is handcuffs. Obviously, they have the talent, proven record if they have it. If not, looking for the splits or looking for handcuffs that have PPR value.
So when you can, you want your cake and you want to eat it too, right?
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Like, why not? Right? Like, if you can get the standalone value, even when the starter's healthy, and then to play in a flex spot or whatever else, and then
I gotta say, I mean,
still get that upside.
It sounds like a cop out, and it's because it is, but it's situational dependent.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, like, if Alexander Madison is chilling on the bench in one of your leagues, he's not going to last more than a couple hours. Because Dalvin Cook is just so injury prone that
he's going to miss a few games at least every year. He doesn't tend to miss a whole year for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So, like,
Alexander
a couple
Madison,
games.
He's got the skill level that when he does play, he puts out, and he has a massive output. So, obviously, you want that handcuff. But, like, in some cases, I guess it really depends. For me, I would think of the Seahawks, and I might tear up when I talk about this, but their running back system last year was just so all over the place. Like, Chris Carson gets injured, and he's on the
IR.
I think he's on the IR. I don't know why I was blanking on the word. And so now you got 3 guys or 2 guys who nobody knows who these people are, and you're having to pick one. I don't want all 3, but so I have to choose from one of these 3 unknown dudes.
Right, eventually it becomes a mess because now you're in a committee of backups, which there's no worse place for a fantasy football player to be than to be in a committee of backup, because you don't have the opportunity and you don't have the talent. And as we talked about, we're looking for
that's the equation for fantasy football points. You just set it up.
Yeah, right.
Set it all up.
So, no, absolutely.
Handcuffs are one of those weird ones for me. I do weirdly enough, I do try and target my own late if I can, but it depends on who's there and what kind of lottery tickets are you getting, and at the end of the day, everything is what's the value of it, what are you paying to get it, and is it I like to target other people's.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I will headhunt other people in order to. Yeah. We have a guy in our league, and he stacks the running back bench deep, and I target his backups, and the reason
because he always steals my handcuff, and then my guy gets injured, and then I have nothing to do but sit there and cry.
Because I personally don't want to be involved in a situation where my guy goes down, and I now have to like trade for a backup on their team. Like, that sounds weird, but
it makes sense.
And then I don't want to overpay, and they just have a weird value where it's not necessarily determined until they're needed. And then at that point, the value will change based on how long they're going to be, whoever their other handcuff or whoever the primary player is missing. But I like to target other people because I feel like it sounds terrible, but it disrupts their game. And if I can disrupt their game to win, like,
you might get a trade offer coming through, right? Like, halfway through the season, they might go, my guy's maybe had a scary hit or something. And
the other thing about handcuffs, I think, as far as when it comes to draft compared to in season, like, I think there's, in my opinion, handcuffs, there's a few exceptions where I would actually draft a handcuff and keep it maybe longer term. I think really the only one that comes to mind, at least off the top of my head, is Dalvin Cook and Alexander Madison, because Dalvin Cook is actually injury prone, and he has shown that. Whereas, like, towards the end of the season, especially when it comes down to playoffs, if you have the ability to still pick up a handcuff, even if it's maybe one of those lower end handcuffs, because it's so depleted when it comes to people that are available, you already know who's broken out, those different types of things, and you're preparing for a longer run. Where if you're running backs,
trade anymore,
you're running back, you can't trade anymore. Your running backs are already They've already been through the ringer since already halfway through the season. So I think in that case, that's where I think handcuffs really come into play as you get closer, and you can start to look for them if they're available. Maybe try to trade for them if you can get a decent value before they're injured, or maybe they're on the free agency. You can just pick them up because I think at that time all the majority, if you're getting close to playoffs, you're talking week 14, 15. Yeah, majority of the best free agents have already been picked up.
And kind of to your point, like as it gets to the end of the season, their coaches are more likely to sit some of those maybe injury-prone players if they have a playoff, if they have a real-world playoff chance.
Especially if they've already locked in
or
whatever.
If you think about your roster construction too, like towards playoffs, are you going to actually need that extra wide receiver 5, or you actually need your handcuff in case they get injured? Exactly. You look at what's more important on your team and the bench.
So you bring up a great point, and that transitions us perfectly to our last segment here, which is all about balancing the budget.
Oh yeah,
I hate it.
Balancing budget. So you mentioned, so this is a great lead-in. You mentioned that you like to be able to go and get your handcuff before that trade deadline hits and you're running into that playoff run towards the end there. Do you save some waiver wire budget for that?
So before we get into it, can you explain for those that might not know what you're referring to as far as a budget's concerned?
Yes, so when we played, and this has become really the standard in most places nowadays, but it's called FAB, which is a free agency budget system.
Yep, free agent acquisition budget. Yep.
I forget that second A because I don't like it. It ruins my FAB. It's not FAB, it's FAB.
I wish it was FAB, but I think there's isn't that a drink or something? I think you can't use that.
Oh, is that why? We need to discover that drink now. We're going to make it, even if it doesn't exist. But any which way, so the free agency acquisition budget, or the FAB, is where you have a set dollar amount at the beginning of the season. It can be $100, it can be $1,000. Usually it's an increment of 10 because math is easier that way.
Yep.
Then you go out, and based off of who's available in the free agency pool, everybody blind bids on the player, and the player, or the fantasy owner with the highest bid for that player that week gets them, and they lose that money, whatever they bid, out of their budget. So the question really is how do you manage that budget? What are some strategy and some philosophy as far as do you use it early? Do you save it for that playoff run that you just are sure that you're going to be in, even though you're 0-8? That's usually where I'm at.
So I've gone back and forth on this. When I first started playing fantasy football, I actually saved it up basically till the end of the year, and you realize, especially when it comes to really good free agency pickups, it can vary obviously when it comes out, but you really see a lot of pickups and important pickups like within the first few weeks. So you don't want to be tight with your budget. You want to be able to be willing to spend within reason and still leave yourself some room, so that way you have some throughout the season. And definitely don't spend all your budget, especially getting close to the playoffs, because as we've seen in the last few years with examples like Rashard Penny being an example, like a free or Amon-Ra St. Brown would be another one, where those are really late season pickups, where if you spend all your budget early on, then you would be in trouble. So for me, I would typically spend a decent amount my first couple weeks if I find some players that I really like, especially if I have roster needs, because you just coming out of the draft, you kind of know what you might need, and then really try to keep it low or medium throughout the season, and as I get closer to the playoffs, try to look for maybe those home run hitters. And I think you really have to determine, what I like about it is you have to determine what you're willing to give up for this player, and if you really believe in the player, then you need to give up. If you think it's going to be a game-changing player, like Rashard Penny from last year, whatever the case is, you got to be willing to give up majority of fab, or if you really think it's going to be, live
make or break.
I will say it's takes a little bit of finesse with determining how much you need, because the exact same that you described happened to me, where I blew my budget early on in the season. I really, really needed a running back when I was rolling into the playoffs, and I wanted Rashard Penny, and the other person just stomped my bid.
Yeah.
And I maybe had like $30 to spend, and he ended up going for just a massive amount, and it screwed me. So,
no, that's a really, really good point. And I know I'll let you talk again, sorry, but the other thing I wanted to say too is, for your point, is determining on what position you want to try to spend your money on, because really, if you think about it, the hardest position to get and the most important position to get typically is going to be running back. So you see that a lot when you're talking about leagues, is that a lot of people save a lot of their budget. They might spend it here and there, but for that game-changing running back that could really set you up for playoff run or season long or whatever the case is.
And I also think that there's there's like a bar for what you should spend on each player, and a lot of times you'll go in and blow your budget. You're thinking that this guy is going to be the next dude, and you blow your budget early, spending half of it on a player that just never pans out, or just nothing happens.
Here's what I'll say personally, and I just want to make this point so that everybody knows that my track record as far as spending fab is absolutely horrible. It's terrible. I am trash at this. This is like the worst part of
that's
fantasy
why he
football.
didn't talk first.
That's right.
You're among friends on this one.
because here's what I'll do is I'll either blow everything at the beginning of the season, or I'll be right before the playoffs, and then I'll not have spent a dime.
Like a schoolboy with a pretty new toy.
And then I'll be like, oh, I'm panic. I'm going to spend it all. And then I never get a Rashard Penny. I get, I don't know, someone not good. I'm not going to talk bad about anybody. But I'll spend way too much money on a player who does nothing. So it's
I can pull up the league if you want me to look. I can give you names.
Please don't. But no, and I think that it's what I think I really need to do, and I think it's important to mention, is that you're going to get frustrated throughout the season. You're going to be frustrated with your team, the fact that people are getting hurt, or that your lineup's not what you would like, or that you're on a losing streak, or whatever else. And don't pull an Ethan.
No.
And blow your free agency budget at that time. Have a systematic approach. Have some flexibility. Be willing to take a step back. All things that I do not do, but do as I say, not as I do. And you'll be better off. You'll be better off, right?
Yeah.
I think I agree with you 100%. And also you kind of have to keep in mind that not every waiver wire pickup is going to be a hit. You're gonna spend money on players that don't pan out, and you're going to spend money on players that just aren't going to do anything, and you're going to waste some money. But
the other thing with free agency budget is I think when you actually create your waivers for that night, because I know other systems would be free agents where you just pick them up right away. Others do a waiver system, but it doesn't involve budgeting. I think it's really important to put a lot of bids in, not a lot of bids, but have multiple bids in for maybe dropping one player or whatever the case. Almost always think of myself like as who's the guy from Charlie from It's Always Sunny, where he's on the board, he's trying to connect all these dots. You're doing the same thing with free agent buddy. You're like, I'm going to drop this player, but I might pick up this player for this much or this player for this much. But if you had multiple options and multiple things, so if you don't get your player, you can still get somebody else that maybe not the one you wanted, but maybe it turns out to be better than the player that everybody overspent on. So set your limit of what you want. I'm only going to spend this much on this guy. If I don't get him, I'm gonna have this other guy that I can pick up that will be a consolation prize. That way, mentally you feel like at least I got something, and also you're not going over and spending too much money on one player that may or may not be beneficial to your team.
I gotta say, I'm with you, with both of you on this, and I also relate very heavily with you. Waiver wire is not my specialty. That is just, I think it's rough, and it's a hard learning curve to throw in the free agent budget, and
you should see me at waiver nights, man. I'm sweating. I'm on the computer for 2 or 3 hours.
You are truly great at it. In all seriousness,
I would say
Eli is the master of this. Absolutely. If anybody is curious,
but you also pick up and drop more players than I. And I have also watched, especially in leagues that I'm in with you, I watch you drop, and I'll target some of those players that you drop.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of times, they turn out to be
Find someone in your league that does the work and then cheat off their homework, guys.
Exactly. That's the.
Don't be afraid.
If you get one thing from this podcast, that's what you need to do.
It works. I mean, like, it may seem dumb, but it works.
Yeah, no, it's definitely the case. I've definitely made some drops where I realized that I did not want to do that.
And sometimes there is that little, like, going back to finesse. Like, there is knowing, you pick up a guy and maybe next week he doesn't pan out. And you spend a bunch of money on him. Like, maybe it's not a good idea to drop him immediately when you spent, a tenth of your free agent budget or your fab budget.
Yep.
It may be not a good idea to drop him after 1 week of underproduction. It might be a good idea to hold on to this dude because you never know what's going to happen.
It's true, absolutely. Give your players a little bit of leeway. Don't get trigger happy because you can hurt yourself, but also know when to cut it because you're still dragging yourself down. So it's a fine balance. The other thing that I would say that I think is important to try to save your money as far as when it comes to free agent budget is picking up players. If you have an open spot or a spot that you feel like I could probably drop this player and picking up somebody during the week when it's not actual waivers or free, you have to spend money on it, or you can get it for a zero bid or whatever the case is. So that way, if you feel like they have a really good matchup, maybe they're going to go off this week. If I have an extra roster spot where I don't really want this guy or whatever the case is, I might throw him on there. Or maybe on Sunday, you can. If you have somebody that gets injured or goes to IR, you can put them in your IR spot and pick up somebody as a running back, and then if they hit, they hit. If they don't, you just drop them. But those
free 99 shots, right?
The ones that you can get for free, if you can get ahead of the game instead of having to spend, 200 to 300 of your budget. If you're doing 1,000 budget, you can get a huge advantage and save some of your fab too.
I have a really bad problem with holding on to trash players for a lot longer than they should.
But I drafted them, so they have to be good because I put my heart into that player.
So is it the meme with the possum and it's in the trash can? It's like, don't touch my trash.
Yeah. It's like Forky. I'm trash.
Same here. It's so easy to get caught up, and I think that, I mean, we keep coming back to a few main themes. I feel like if you guys take anything away from this podcast, is that have a systematic approach. Don't get caught up in your emotions, whether it's during draft day or with waivers or with who you're keeping on your roster. It's like, yes, there are players. Yes, you can still root for them if they're not on your fantasy football team. That is okay. It's totally fine if they end up doing great after you cut them or whatever else. But sometimes if you have to make that move in order to make your fantasy season work. You have to make that move, and
you got to trim the edges in order to keep the herd strong. It's very much survival of the fittest.
Yeah, this is a game of optimization, not of pick your favorite character.
I wish it was like that.
That would be very nice. Very nice. So
if it's a fun, and just for the people who may be listening, like, what are the advantages for fab versus waiver wire? We got to talk about it because every year we have a family league where we have the debate about whether or not fab is going to be the way to go or whether or not it's going to.
There's one player who is not in this room who is adamant that fab is trash.
Yeah.
And then Eli is the ultimate defender of fab over here.
I will get on my high horse for the next 2 minutes probably. So as far as fab, what I consider it to be is I think it's an equalizer. Like if you look at the different types of pickups that you can do other than fab, you have free agency, and then you have like a regular waiver system. Those are really the only things you had until they figured out that this is a system they could use. Free agency, the issues with that is that you can pick up. The nice thing is you can pick up players whenever you want, which is obviously great. The issue with that is when you have people that can't literally devote their whole lives to being on a device, no matter what the situation is, or for example, even on Sundays. So if you're on Sundays and you have, let's say, kids.
Let's say four
daughters. Kids, four daughters to be specific. Let's just put that out there. No examples.
Where you got that from?
Just a random
thought. I'm not. It's whatever the case is.
Yeah.
But it gives people a chance. If you have free agent system, it's first person to click the button. It's first person to get to it. It limits what you can do in your normal day life if you have to do something, and it doesn't require a lot of skill. I would say it's more about being first, and some people like that. But for me, I rather make it about skill rather than being the first one to actually hit the button on a device.
It creates a game within the game, and
Correct.
you have to be knowledgeable and smart at fantasy football and good at the FAB game in order to win in a FAB system, which is why we like them and we tend to use them.
Now let me talk about the other system, which would be the waiver system, and why that has some faults with it too. So waiver system is similar to FAB. You put in waivers, and they run, and you can get your player. Yeah, so the issue with that is it's based off of the ranking of the week, so your standings in the league. Mm-hmm. And the reason that can be an issue sometimes, especially really at the beginning of the year, if you go 0-1, for example, the first week, well, one of the most important weeks in free agency or picking up players is really the first 3 weeks. Well, if you go 0-1 or 0-2 and you're able to pick up game-changing players because you lost only a couple games, maybe against one of the best teams, now you have a huge advantage that you can take advantage of and have players that you can have throughout the whole year.
Just
because you lost. You incentivize losing.
Not if you're.
And I have dealt with players that have taken advantage of that, and you get into sketchy situations where people, let's just say, look the other way and actually put in a player that should not be in the starting lineup, just for the fact of getting waiver priority. So
which is a dangerous game to play, but you can load up a team that way, and I was in that league with you.
Mm-hmm. So that's the major issue with it. So the advantage, last thing to say with the advantage of like Ethan said, the cool thing about the free agent budget, it's a game within the game. So that's why we talked about balancing the budget. It's up to you deciding what players are the most important to you and when to pick them up, because you have the discrepancy of putting whatever amount of money you want on each individual player. So it's really in your control. You make the decisions, and then it's a gamble between other players. And I think there's more excitement to it because, in my opinion, when you wake up the next day, obviously free agency, you don't have this. You wake up the next day, you can go. The first thing I do is go look and see, who did I get? How much did I get him for? Did somebody overpay me? Oh my gosh, I can't believe they spent $600 of their $1,000 budget on this guy. He's gonna be trash. Like it involves a lot more of the league, and there's trash talk with it, and like.
You don't have to talk trash about my waiver wire pickup.
Well,
the bad waiver wire.
I was gonna point anybody out.
Yeah. More often than not, for me, it feels like sad Christmas. Like there's no presents or anything.
There's nothing better waking up and seeing you outbid somebody by 1 point to pick up a player. You can rub it in their face all week. How do you not want that feeling? So in my opinion, and I'm a very strong advocate for it, free agent budget is the best system to play for. It just adds more competition, more fun, more trash talk.
It just makes it more fair.
It makes it more fair too.
Makes it more fair.
Makes it more fair too.
I've seen it, but I don't know if it's intentional, where people have lost and gotten 3-4 really, really good game-changing players, like you're saying. Thank God that they weren't very good at the game anyways, but it definitely could be crushing if you have somebody who strategically loses.
Even later in the waiver part of it, because I've been in a different league where I am in the waivers, and I've been begging this commissioner to change it for years, but he's super stubborn. Not going to drop any names, but you know who you are. And the issue with it too, even if you're actually let's say it's later in the season even, and you are in a great position to make the playoffs, you're in top 3. Well, and there's players that come up, you still want the advantage to be able to pick up those players and really set yourself aside and be able to maybe make a longer playoff run. Well, if you don't have any chance to actually put it in because some turd ball that's not going to even be in the playoffs. He's 0-12, but he's still putting in waiver wires, which, by the way, that'd be me. I'd be still putting waiver wires. But they pick up the player that you want. That's a disadvantage for you too. It makes it so that you can't improve your team to the fullest that you'd be able to in a normal system.
Turns into the toilet bowl league.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
what Eli has been saying for the last 5 minutes.
Yes, I told you it'd be a long spell.
Is
Fab good.
fab is
is
good,
good.
guys. Do fab.
Yeah.
It is worth it. And it is fab, not fab. There's 2 A's. So don't forget that second A in there. And
if anybody says any different, you send them to me.
that's right. Eli will set them straight here. All right, guys. Well, hey, I want to just say thank you to everybody who took the time out to listen to us today. It has been a lot of fun going through everything and just talking everything through. So thank you so much for joining us for the very first, very, very, very first episode.
Ground floor.
That's right, of the Fantasy Playcallers. So glad to have you here along for the ride, and please stay tuned for more.
See ya.